We have a delegation of religious leaders from Ukraine who are here today to show their solidarity on behalf of the humanitarian catastrophe that is unfolding in the country. The UN estimates 1.2 million internally displaced people. US estimates go as high as 1.9 million. 1.7 million children have been affected by the conflict. UNICEF estimates that more than 700,000 of them are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. We're here to meet with leaders of the business community and the religious communities of Chicago. This delegation represents all the major faith traditions of Ukraine. Immediately to my left, the Metropolitan of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Metropolitan Epiphany. Seated next to him, Father Bogdan Timoshenko, who heads humanitarian services for the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. To his left, the Mufti, the spiritual leader of the Muslim communities of Ukraine. A particular target of Russian aggression right now are the Crimean Tatars, the Muslim community of about 300,000 people. The Honorable Chief Mufti of Ukraine, Sheikh Ahmed Tamim. To his left, Bishop of the Roman Catholic Church in Ukraine, Auxiliary Bishop, Father Jan Sabilo. Seated in the audience somewhere to my left, and I think temporarily hiding. Yes, there he is. Bishop Valery Reshetinsky, the representative of 20 Protestant denominations in Ukraine. Absent from the group this afternoon, the chief rabbi of Kiev and Ukraine, Yaakov Dov-Bleich, who had another engagement this afternoon, but will be with us tonight at an activity in Northbrook.
From inside Russia into Ukraine, and Ukrainians actually have the voice recordings of the Russian soldiers, the Russian commanding who called Moscow air defense and said, "Can I shoot down this missile or this airplane coming over?" And they said, "Yeah, shoot it down." Boom! You know, an anti-aircraft missile against a huge airliner flying at 37,000 feet that doesn't know it's going to be attacked? Not much of a contest. So it was clear that that was done with active Russian leadership control and direction. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian forces continued to struggle and work and try not to kill people because it was their own country. They tried not to blow up the country. When they got near the Russian border, what happened was that the Russians engaged. They used heavy artillery and rockets. They used cluster munitions with fuel air explosives. And in 3 days, it was really ugly. So the Ukrainian forces pulled back. President Poroshenko asked for help because there was a 100-mile wide hole in Ukrainian lines, and there were maybe 3,000 or 4,000 active Russian force troops, tanks, infantry, artillery inside eastern Ukraine. So he asked for help. This is what Putin was looking for. Putin wasn't looking for a full-scale war. He was looking to take Ukraine. And so he has 3 ways to take it. He can take it militarily, he can take it politically, and he can take it economically. Militarily is the ugliest way, because if you take it militarily, you're going to make people even more angry, and you're going to lose people, and you're going to have to tell your own people you're fighting a war. Politically is best if you can force Poroshenko to lose the parliament. There were parliamentary elections in October, and guess what? Poroshenko and Prime Minister Yatsenyuk didn't lose. So Putin didn't get anything for it. You could win economically if you could cut off the gas and bankrupt the economy. That was tried too. None of that worked. So in December, Mr. Putin told the Russian generals who control the separatists, "I want you to go and clear out to the oblast boundaries in Donetsk and Lugansk." So they attacked. They got stuck at Donetsk airport and then at Debaltseve, a rail junction. And instead of bypassing, they converged. And Ukrainian forces actually fought some incredibly heroic defensive battles against modern technology, and they won. And now there's Minsk II, and the Russians are preparing a 3rd wave of the attack. Now look, let's be very clear about what this is. This is hybrid warfare. This is a Russian war plan. What you see is not what it looks like. This war plan was first exercised in 1999. It was exercised again in 2009 and again in 2013. We saw it in the West as a four-phased war plan because they had to report the war games through the Conventional Forces in Europe Treaty. Under this war plan, there were four phases: terrorist, irregular forces, peace enforcement, and de-escalation. Well, when we looked at it, we said, oh, they're worried about terrorists just like us. But what we didn't understand was they were the terrorists. Phase number one, Spetsnaz. Phase number two, Russian intelligence build irregular forces. They recruit patriotic people, thugs, convicts, criminals, mercenaries, anybody you can fight. Phase number three, the Russian army intervenes. It calls itself peacekeeping, but it's a Russian army intervention. Phase number four, de-escalation. That occurs if NATO gets upset and the Russians fire a nuclear weapon. And in the Russian exercises, they have fired nuclear weapons at Warsaw and at Norfolk, Virginia. And the idea would be, hey, my goodness, they care so much about Ukraine, they're willing to shoot a nuclear weapon. Okay, well, we give up. You can have Norfolk. Sorry, didn't mean to do it to you. That's the Russian thinking. So this is all the unfolding of a plan. Now the question is how far it goes and what happens next. But we're into the sort of heart of European diplomacy here because I know that Chancellor Merkel means the very best. She doesn't want to see World War III begin over Ukraine. You have to understand about Ukraine. It's been fought over and fought over and fought over. Ukraine lost 17% of its population in World War II. Before that, it had millions of people starved to death when the communists created the famine through collectivization. And after World War II, there was still partisan warfare going on against the Soviet troops in Western Ukraine. So this is a country that's been fought over and fought over and fought over. And it's a real tragedy. So Chancellor Merkel doesn't want war. So her view is that there must be some way to work this out with Mr. Putin where he'll stop. And that's what she's tried to do. Now, there are some relevant historical analogies, and then I'm going to stop here. In 1918, thanks to massive U.S. Army intervention in Europe, the Allies crushed the Central Powers on the Western Front. And in late October, Germany sued for an armistice. The losses had been so devastating that the civilian government had fallen. The Kaiser had abdicated, and there was a request to just stop the fighting. This led to the Versailles Treaty. And in 1921-22, a former corporal in the German army, who actually was an Austrian and may have been Jewish. Well, some people said there was some kind of connection. I don't know if that was true or not. You know, it's lost in the mysteries of history. But he began to rant and rave that Germany was never defeated, it was betrayed. We were stabbed in the back, he said, by these political leaders. The mighty German army was never defeated. Under the Versailles Treaty, Germany had a right to keep 100,000 soldiers. But the area in the northwest of Germany, the Rhineland, no soldiers could be in the Rhineland. Some people laughed at Hitler. The Allies exacted horrible economic reparations on Germany. Everybody's heard the story of these, Germans wheeling wheelbarrows full of cash to buy a loaf of bread. Actually, if you go back and look at the record, a lot of that inflation was the result of Germany's central bankers combating the French and British efforts to extract wealth from Germany. So some of it was self-inflicted. Regardless, by 1933, the corporal was in charge. Germany's armed forces were rebuilt, and in the fall of 1935, he decided he would reoccupy the Rhineland against the Versailles Treaty. It was a revenge theory that motivated the German populace. They believed They had never been defeated, the Allies were unfair, and they wanted their place in the world. And Hitler epitomized that. But the generals were cautious. They said, look, if you go into the Rhineland, this could be a casus belli. Legally, the French and British have a right to then occupy the Rhineland by force. We've kept them off Germany. They could occupy us. Hitler said, well, I don't think there's much risk, but just to be sure, we'll do it with the 1930s version of hybrid warfare. We'll just put a couple of battalions in there. We'll sort of smoke it out. If there's no reaction, then we'll go in full speed. And so there was no reaction. The Allies were caught up in the Depression. They didn't want to fight. He went in and he occupied the Rhineland. He took Austria. In 1938, he demanded the right to look after the Czech citizens of German descent in Czechoslovakia and Sudetenland. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain of Britain was faced with an awful, awful responsibility on his shoulders. He had to decide whether or not to take the risk of a renewed war. He knew this man, Hitler, was charismatic. Britain wasn't rearmed and ready for it. And the future of mankind might rest on his decision. So he went to see Adolf Hitler at Munich. There was a discussion. Hitler said, yeah, just give me Sudetenland, I'll be happy, and we don't have to worry about anything. Chamberlain flew back to Britain and said, I think it will be peace in our time. He's the most reviled British Prime Minister in modern British history. It's known as appeasement. It's total failure. We don't know what would have happened to the world if we had stood up to Adolf Hitler in 1936 and said, you better follow the Versailles Treaty, we're going to kick your you-know-what. We didn't, for a lot of reasons. Today, when I look at the dispatches that come out of Europe, I see the historical echoes. Same well-meaning intention. Good people can reason together. Mr. Putin's certainly going to be agreeable to this. All he wants is these two provinces, these two oblasts in eastern Ukraine. He just wants it to be a federal system. And of course he wants his naval bases in Crimea. Surely we can work this out. I'm sure that's all there is to it. But is it? Have we learned the lessons of history, or must we relearn them? So this is about Ukraine. It's about 45 million people struggling for the right to set their own course. It's about Western values. They're fighting for us. It's about the fundamental principle of Western civilization, and especially the global order since the end of World War II, which is no changing national boundaries by force of arms. And it's about the future of stability, growth, and peace in Eastern Europe. All of that in Ukraine. All of that's coming to a head in the next few weeks. Will there be a renewed Russian offensive? Will Mrs. Merkel succeed in forcing Ukraine to bow to the demands of Mr. Putin? What are Mr. Putin's ultimate ambitions, and what will be his next actions? Ladies and gentlemen, you are going to decide much of this through your opinion, your watchfulness, and your determination to help the United States and our leadership do the right thing. Thank you. Okay, we'll take some questions now. Going to have to stand up and speak loudly. And tell me your name.
My name is Cameron Stowe. I'm a senior here. In the introduction, historical memory was mentioned. And I wonder, when we're talking about the United States and Ukraine, we're talking about two very different historical memories. And my question is, to what extent is it important, I think, that Americans understand the historical context of Ukraine, and what do you think the American capacity is to do so? And I mean that not just with regards to students, but also to our elected representatives.
Well, I think the elected representatives do understand the historical context, but I think the American people don't. You know, in the American political system, we respond to public pressure. When I went to Washington in 1994, there was a guy named Randall Robinson, whom most of you have never heard of. He was an African-American nationalist. And he was on a hunger strike in front of the White House, protesting the fact that the junta in Haiti had deposed the elected president, Bertrand Aristide. And he mobilized the Congressional Black Caucus, and we were really determined to restore democracy to Haiti. That was an issue close to home that Americans understood. The Balkans were never an issue Americans understood. The resolution to support U.S. forces once the bombing campaign began was blocked and fought in the Republican-controlled Congress by Representative Tom DeLay. And maybe he was just against Bill Clinton, but maybe it was just because that there's a bunch of unpronounceable names and most people don't know anything about it. Now, you know, I'm here in Chicago, which is one of the most sophisticated and diverse cities in the world. I grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas, and where I grew up in Arkansas, I was the only person in my class who wasn't born in the state of Arkansas for most of my 12 years in school there. So, and if you go back there today, there still aren't many skis and other you know, names of people. We did get a few Poles that came out in the 1980s, but basically it's mostly Johnsons, Browns, Smiths, Jones, and so forth. I mean, that's Arkansas. And a lot of the country is this country is not what you think it is until you travel. I went to 30 states in 3 months running for president, and I discovered they are enormously different. And if you just go from Chicago to New York to LA, you don't know the United States of America. And so when you try to get the United States of America involved in something, it's really tough, and it's really slow. Saddam Hussein made a crucial mistake in 1990. Nobody knew where Iraq was, by the way. But he appeared in a uniform, he looked like a thug, and he had this 9-year-old boy sitting on his knee. And I guess he was trying to be nice, you know. He says, I'm Saddam Hussein, just like Santa Claus. But he came across looking like Satan, not Santa Claus. And that picture was shown again and again and again. And he became vilified. It was Saddam Hussein's image that launched 1,000 ships, so to speak, in the Gulf War and again in 2003. There's no such personification yet. However, Vladimir Putin better be very careful, because Americans are not prone to like guys, short guys who claim to be martial arts specialists whose real specialty is riding horses nude. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, my name is Ina Naroditska. Thank you, General. You began with great story of the father general who had 2 sons in Moscow and 1 in Kiev. Don't you think, and actually this question for you, because you have a wonderful entourage today, what's going to happen if America will launch into military actions? What will happen with the father and with the sons? The story is complicated. I did this search in South Chicago in Ukrainian village. And I know that it's not so simple.
Right.
Here you all...
Now, how long have you been in the United States?
25 years.
Okay.
I'm from Azerbaijan, actually. So, and the other question, very brief one. It's wonderful to have representative of different religious faith in Ukraine. I'm missing one, especially when you talk about losses of Second World War. Main Jewish population was in territory of Ukraine.
We've had the Jewish population.
Great.
We've had the Jewish people with us the whole time. I don't know where the rabbi went.
Okay.
Anybody know where he is?
Okay, so
Gary?
it makes me very happy.
Don't worry, they're all here. But ma'am, let me answer your question, because I want to get to
But
a
I
lot of other
want
people.
them, yes.
They're not going to answer it just yet. They're going to answer it in a minute. Okay? They
Thank
don't
you
all
for
speak,
coming.
excuse me, they don't all speak English. So, look, the United States is not going to launch a military operation in Ukraine. So the question is not only hypothetical, but it's wrong. So forget it. The United States is not going to attack Russia through Ukraine. The United States is not going to put airplanes in there. It's not going to put tanks in there. And it's not going to fight for Ukraine. Ukraine is not Iraq. These are educated people who they're trained. I spent hours with the top Ukrainian general. He's smart. He understands what he's doing. He would like to have an anti-tank rocket that could penetrate the Russian armor, and he'd like some way to be able to handle this heavy Russian artillery. He's asked us for counter-battery radars, which we've refused to provide. We've refused to provide anti-tank missiles that will support him. We've refused to allow his neighbors to give him spare artillery ammunition. But the United States, forget it. We're not going to go fight, so don't worry about it. Right here.
General, thanks for coming. Mark Munn. I'm a graduate student at the Kellogg School of Management. My question for you is, what specifically do you propose the United States do? We had the former U.S. ambassador in Moscow here a few weeks ago, and he was saying essentially that even if we were to supply arms to the Ukrainian government, this wouldn't make a big difference in big picture, because if Vladimir Putin wants to take over these provinces, oblast, he will. So what is the plan in your opinion? What would be the end game?
Well, this is one of the key. You're dealing in hybrid warfare. You're dealing with the military, economic, the informational, and the diplomatic. So let me just answer your question this way. So the military attacks, right? So the informational is Vladimir Putin says, not my military. No, those aren't Russian soldiers. No, we didn't provide them weapons. No, these were Ukrainian weapons. You see, we can show you this tank came from some, that's all a lie. Okay? Foreign Minister Lavrov, on the diplomatic circuit, he lies. It's part of the strategy. But they don't just lie to lie. They lie to promote certain themes of information. One of the most important themes is it's useless to help Ukraine militarily. No one can stand against the mighty Russian forces. In fact, the Russian forces are stretched real thin right now, and the Ukrainians have done the impossible. They've twice defeated the Russian forces. So, for example, at Donetsk Airport, the Russians sent in their specially trained assault battalion. They lost 100 people on the field of battle. They lost 400 wounded, and the battalion was basically devastated. So there's example after example. These Ukrainian forces are fighting with 1970s equipment against modern Russian equipment, and they're winning. They're winning until the Russians can bring an overwhelming technological superiority. So when he says it won't do any good to help, what it will do is it will raise the threshold at which the military option is workable. As the people in Ukraine said to me, they said, well, I said, what if Russia uses its Air Force? It's got hundreds of strike aircraft ringing Ukraine. Ukraine has modest air defense, but nothing like Russia has. What if it uses its aircraft? They could take out all of the Ukrainian military, or at least completely devastate the country from the air and disorganize everything pretty quickly. He said, well, that would be total war. Yeah, that would be total war, and that's not what Putin wants yet. So you have to understand the game. Putin sees this way. He sees, if he plays this right, he gets Ukraine. He keeps his role in Syria and becomes more influential in the Middle East. He holds his leverage over the United States through the Iranian peace talks, and he gets sanctions lifted because he knows the Europeans want nothing more than normalcy. This is the same thing Britain and France wanted with Germany. Why should we go with, in 1939, 38? Why should there be war? We're doing trade. We need our economy to work. You're making it very hard for business by standing on these principles of no aggression. And we like appeasement in business. It's like the leader of Siemens said in Moscow when he went to Putin's birthday party in 2014. He says, we can deal with this, man. There's nothing. Forget about Ukraine. This is too important for Germany. We need to work with Russia. So there's all these contrasting themes. But I think the major themes of Russian propaganda that are operative are, A, it's useless to help Ukraine because they could never stand up against the Russian army. Theme number 2, Ukraine is hopelessly corrupt, can't govern itself, and all the money and stuff will be wasted. Theme number 3, if the West tries to help, you will be destroyed by Russian nuclear power. Look, see these aircraft flying around? They can bomb us. So you better be careful because we're coming after you next. The Russian ambassador to Denmark made such a statement to the Danes. They didn't appreciate it, but the Russians learn and they tune their message carefully to the audience's sensibilities. And message number 4 is, Russia's wealthy, and what you're doing is you're destroying your own economy. So the French top French businessmen came to me and said, you got to stop these sanctions. You're destroying the French economy. Financiers in London say, you think it's bad in France, you ought to see what it's doing on the city. And of course the Germans say, we really need those markets. So there are major themes of this warfare. Some are true, most of them are false. And that's what you're being bombarded with. You know, if you ever watch the TV channel RT on cable, that's Russian propaganda. I know Larry King works for it. I even made the mistake of doing an interview with Larry King about a year and a half ago. But that's Putin's way of reaching into the United States. So the truth is that if we provide a moderate degree of assistance, military assistance, to Ukraine, we will raise the threshold at which Putin can no longer deny to his own people that he's fighting in Ukraine. His greatest problem is he can't justify it to the people of Russia. Why would they fight against their brothers in Ukraine? Why are they killing people? He declared Rostov-on-Don a plague-infested city so that the trucks carrying the bodies could come back through Rostov. They buried, according to the Ukrainian people I talked to, several thousand people from the September-October battles in Rostov. They also had 5 mobile crematorium that were driving around eastern Ukraine, picking up bodies and burning them. And when people tried to expose this in Russia, they were intimidated. In some cases, a couple of people were killed. So this is a major part of this information warfare campaign. Yes, sir.
Richard Sobel.
Yeah, Richard.
I'm a visiting scholar at the Buffett Center, sponsor company. Let me extend on this question here. You said give more aid to the Ukrainian government that will essentially checkmate Russia. What is the solution to getting Russia to actually leave Ukraine or to essentially transform the situation? Do you see a role for Europe, NATO, the United States? And you also mentioned that people are sort of threatening that this could be World War III. Do you see that as a larger conflagration, or do you essentially see this something as
Well,
manageable?
Richard, those are good questions, and I appreciate you bringing them up. So, you know, let's take it in reverse order. The World War III question, that's part of the Russian propaganda theme. That's why they're flying the bombers, announcing the nuclear weapons and so forth. They want you to believe that, so that you won't help Ukraine. The countries in Eastern Europe have seen this movie before. They know exactly what's coming. That's the reason they're begging for the United States to take the lead and assist Ukraine, because they fear if we don't take the lead and assist Ukraine, that when Putin comes to them, the answer will be exactly the same. The Baltics, Romania, Bulgaria, they're all vulnerable to Russian infiltration by mafia money, by KGB money. Political parties get queasy. There were 3 political parties in Bulgaria last year, each of which was vying to be Russia's pathway back to Europe. I talked to President Plevnev, and he said, what am I going to do? He said, they're going to, you know, if you don't stop the Russians here, they're going to take over Bulgaria again. So the role for Europe and NATO and the United States to think about is what we do in Ukraine has large long-term significance. Now, what would make Russia give up Ukraine or give up eastern Ukraine? Well, what would make it give up is the slow erosion of support inside Russia for continuing to support Vladimir Putin. What would give it up is Ukrainian television penetrating and being broadcast throughout Russia that shows the conditions of prosperity and peace in Ukraine. So Ukraine doesn't have to take back the eastern provinces by force. It will take those provinces back by economic prosperity if we can get the fighting stopped and Western investment in. But here's the other point of this that's deeper than this. Europe is right now in its own crisis. It's a crisis every bit as deep as the crisis that afflicted France and Britain during the 1930s. It's a crisis caused by the European idea of austerity, driven by Germany, which doesn't understand Keynes because they didn't go through the Depression. They view economics, their view stopped in the 1920s, maybe updated by Milton Friedman. So they don't understand that if you want to restart the European economy, you have to take that debt that's hanging out there and do something with it. You have to invest to create jobs. China understands this. That's what they're doing. The United States partially understood it in the 2009 recovery bill, but not fully. And we still have our own problems with debt overhang and not investing in real assets. But the Europeans are 10 times as bad. Look, there's roads to be built, power plants, harbors, development of hydrocarbon resources. Germany has no energy policy right now. They don't want nuclear reactors. They're relying on coal. They've missed their Kyoto goals. They've given them away. It's not good leadership. They need a strategy, but they're hamstrung by the way they look at the economy. So I'm going to go beyond my writ. I'm a banker now, and I've written a book called "Don't Wait for the Next War," and I say one of the 5 greatest challenges we face is financial stability. And so the deal is this: you have to make the financial system work for the real economy. Right now, in most of the world, and especially in Europe, the real economy works to support the financial system. In the United States, the way it works is that municipal workers, firemen, police, they put money into pension funds. The pension funds go to Wall Street. The Wall Street takes the money, puts it in big banks. Big banks do trading. There's $650 trillion of derivatives out there. Now, nobody expects to have to pay $650 trillion because that exceeds the total sum of human wealth in the world. But what they do expect is that when they launch a new $10 billion derivative, some banker makes $1 million bonus. Hey, I just persuaded so-and-so to take this. Yeah, that's the way it works. That's called making the real economy work for the financial system. We've been doing a great job of it. It brought us 2008, 2009, and it's running full blast in Europe today. So what Europe needs to do is invest in real development, including in Ukraine. If Europe would do that and create real jobs and let people have a real hope for a future, then Putin is no threat. He'll go away. But if we don't, if we attempt to appease and say, just give him this much, I'm sure that's all he wants, he'll want more. He's already said, Kazakhstan, it's not a real country. After President Obama went to, I think it was Estonia, and made a big appearance there, Putin made sure his intelligence agents kidnapped an Estonian on Estonian territory and accused him of spying and brought him back to Moscow. In the United States, nobody pays any attention. We're involved in, March Madness or something. But in Eastern Europe, they knew what that was. That was Putin's answer to Obama. He said, the United States can talk, but Russia will act. And that's the danger that we face. Honey, just give me a minute, okay? Let's go to this lady in the back, and then we'll come up here.
I'm Polish, by birth, so I'm obviously interested in this.
Are you a student here?
No.
Okay, but okay. So make it quick. I got to get some more students.
Okay.
Too.
So my question is about you just talked about the economy and the finances and so on. So how are the economic sanctions working, if they're working at all? What more could be done in that respect? And also, could you talk a little bit more about the gas blackmail that Putin has going?
Yeah. Well, economics is a big part of this, and I wouldn't say that sanctions aren't imposing hardship, and they're certainly affecting specific individuals. And if you were one of these targeted individuals, and you couldn't travel to, let's say, London to live in your 10 million pound flat and so forth, you'd be pretty upset about it. But in terms of really making Putin change his mind, the record on sanctions has been, they were effective in South Africa, they brought a lot of hardship to Iran, they completely devastated the Haitian economy. But when we applied them in the Balkans in the 1990s, what they did was they gave Slobodan Milosevic much more power. People would come to Milosevic and they'd say, I had this business and now there's sanctions and can you help me? Of course I can help you. And it becomes part of the government's consolidation of power. It generates corruption. It undercuts the rule of law. And in this case, when you're sanctioning Russia, $600 billion worth, or 600 billion euros of trade was underway between Russia and Europe. So much greater than between the United States. And it's a new BlackBerry, and I don't know how to turn it off and stop this thing. Does anybody know a new BlackBerry? No, nobody would be dumb enough to buy a new BlackBerry. So when you look at what the sanctions have done for Europe, it's like the bank robber comes to your house, you had the pistol in the bedroom, you take the pistol out, you confront the bank robber, and you say, behind my back I have a pistol. If you don't get out of here, I'm going to shoot you. But of course it's going to kill me too. But I'm going to shoot you. Now the bank robber might decide to leave. But that's what's happening with these sanctions. So they're squirming and struggling in Europe to find the pretext for relenting on these sanctions. That's what's happening. Is there a student who wants to ask a question? Are you a student, sir?
Yes.
Please.
Hi, I'm Alex Olganos. I'm a PhD student in engineering. I was also born in Kiev. So you're saying that the U.S. is not going to intervene militarily.
Right.
It can moderately support Ukraine in intervening.
Right.
But the whole point of that is to just raise the bar until Russia can no longer lie to its population. Can you not just see Putin selling it to Russians? I mean, I've seen Russian television. I speak Russian. I know what's going on there.
Yeah.
And I've talked to Russian people. It would be easy for him to convince the Russian population that he needs to militarily intervene to save Ukraine from itself or something like that. And do you not think that that's inevitable anyway, even without American intervention, that Ukraine will just hold on long enough, the will is strong enough, the people are strong enough to hold on until that becomes a necessity? And furthermore, how does the fact that Russia is a nuclear power, this isn't the 1930s anymore. Nuclear war is always sort of hanging over our heads, not sort of like a Dr. Strangelove type of situation, but it's there, no?
These are really important questions, and you're asking the right questions. So the way I would answer it is, first of all, none of us know how long Ukraine would hold on. Ukraine's been surprisingly resilient under this. Putin thought he could block the election of President Poroshenko. He didn't. He thought he could disrupt the parliamentary elections and get the parties of region reelected to dominate the Duma or the Rada. He didn't. He thought that he could set loose a campaign of sabotage across Ukraine that would intimidate the population. He failed. So he's had many, many setbacks on this, and Ukraine is becoming ever stronger in the process. The move against the oligarchs has become part and parcel of convincing Europe that Ukraine is serious about cracking down on corruption. And at the same time, it's heartened a lot of Ukrainians who see injustices in their own society. So I think you got to be careful. Don't underestimate the strength of Ukraine. I was really amazed. But here's the other piece of this. If this drags on 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, or 5 years, it's better than having it settled by an invasion today. At least better for NATO, better for the United States, and ultimately better for the people of Ukraine. Because the longer it drags on, the greater the chance that NATO will awaken from its 2 decades of distraction and slumber and do something significant. You know, the NATO governments are now calling to spend 2% of their budget on defense. And people are talking about NATO strategy. And NATO is slow to grip the problem. But once it grips it, NATO doesn't give it up. And so Ukraine is fighting NATO's battle, even though NATO itself can't be involved. At least, not in the foreseeable future. You raise the issue of nuclear weapons. Yeah, I'm worried about nuclear weapons. I'm worried that Russia continued its nuclear modernization program when the United States didn't. But if the United States needs to modernize its nuclear weapons, it can do so, and it can do so very quickly. So we're going to have to face the fact that the Russians have developed a new set of technologies. Unmanned aerial vehicles, rockets, armor, improved armor, improved high performance high power microwaves. There's a lot of technology there that we haven't been deployed with. As one of the Ukrainian generals told me, this is 21st century warfare. The United States will wake up. So yeah, the solution is raise the threshold. Force Mr. Putin to confront whether he wants a state of real antagonism with the West or he wants to pursue multiple objectives and try to eke out success in Ukraine simultaneously. Force him to make that decision. This is all about Mr. Putin. He doesn't want to do it. He's not ready yet. His banks, his currency, everything's too connected to the West. So he's not ready to make that break. Raise that threshold and get peace, invest in Ukraine, build the country democratically and economically, and never give up on the idea of Ukrainian sovereignty over its whole territory. When you deal with Eastern Europe, you will find that there are divergences of opinion. People have very strong ideas. If you come to the South in the United States and you defend Sherman's march to the sea through Georgia, you might find some people didn't like it. For you, it's history. For them, it's their family farm. And in Eastern Europe, everybody remembers history and everybody has a relative. The president of Romania is named Klaus Johannes. He lives in Romania. He's German. He comes from a German city in Romania. It was placed there by the Austrian monarchy. These were Saxon Germans sent to live among the barbarian Romanians to protect the Habsburg Empire 600 years ago. And Eastern Europe is full of ethnic tensions and anger. So what the United States has tried to do is provide stability. I don't know what this gentleman's question was, but I can tell you this, that my actions as NATO commander were reviewed by the International Criminal Tribunal in The Hague, and everything that was done was fully in accordance with international law. I never like to see military action. It should be the last resort. But in the case of Ukraine, you have to remember who initiated that military action. There was one Russian member of Yanukovych's team. People knew him. He was an outstanding sniper. And his trademark was he could shoot so straight that he could hit the protesters in Maidan in the eye. Now, I went through Maidan about 30 days after it was over, and I went to the lamppost where the shooting took place, and I looked at the lamppost. And I expected to see, they said, oh, look at this lamppost, you might see bullet holes. I thought there might be a bullet hole or something. There were like 24 bullet holes in a lamppost that was, this high and this big around. That's not a sniper, that's a fusillade of bullets. So this action was started by Russia. It was started against an innocent people who only wanted the right to determine their own future, not to threaten anyone else. So that's the bottom line on this.